Quiver by Stephanie Spinner. This read aloud is for classroom use only. Part 2. The Homecoming. They entered our settlement on horses, frightening everyone. The children recovered first, hurtling back into the clearing as if they were running one of their wild races. Were these giant four-legged creatures cousins of the winged horse Pegasus? Were they strays from Lord Poseidon's savage herd? Chittering with excitement, the children came as close to the horses as they dared, while the women who had probably mistaken the mounted strangers for centaurs emerged from the trees slowly, whispering imprecations. The men of the tribe were out hunting. Only the two eldest, our headman, Bias, and Castor, had remained behind. Just as he had taught me to make traps before I could speak, Castor had taught me to feather arrows, and when the riders appeared, I had been helping him. I liked the work, which required no thought, only a light touch. It gave me good reason to sit with Castor, the least garrulous of men, in prolonged, uneventful silence. Since my return home from some days before, I had wanted little else. Now I felt a long thrill of amazement. Men rode to battle in horse-drawn chariots. I knew this because Jason had told me, but I had never seen them sitting astride before. It was a wondrous sight. After surprise came a less familiar sensation, the slow, insistent burn of wanting and not having. Who were these men, looking down at us with such arrogance? How had they come to handle these magnificent creatures with such ease? I hated them. Bias greeted them calmly, as if the appearance of men on large walnut-brown steeds were an everyday occurrence. The gleaming horses stood motionless as he approached, and when Aura wove between their tall, finely chiseled legs, sniffing eagerly, they did not even flick their tails. It was as if she were beneath their notice. "We come on behalf of King Iasus," said the older of the two, a broad-faced, balding, curly-bearded man. "He sends for his daughter." The king lived in a region of Arcadia far below our own. Of him I knew only that he was growing old, had once been fond of hunting, and lacked an heir. I had heard no mention of a daughter. Beside me, Castor grunted softly, as if hit in the belly by a rock. Bias's head dropped, and for a moment he said nothing. Then he asked, "He wants her now?" The men nodded. They wore leather sandals and deep blue chitons. The handles of their short swords were inlaid with colored stones. The older man looked around the clearing somewhat impatiently. "Prove you come from the king." Castor said this abruptly, rising to join Bias. The older rider drew in his chin and raised an eyebrow. Surely, his expression said, our splendid horses and imposing weapons are proof enough. "We must know she'll be safe with you," added Castor, by way of explanation. The men looked at each other, then dismounted. The younger man stroked Aura's head, which set her tail to sweeping the ground like a maddened snake. The older man produced a small leather pouch, reached inside, and showed something to Castor and Bias. There was a bright golden flash as they passed it between them. Bias turned my way. His expression was both stern and regretful, as if he were about to deliver judgment or mete out punishment. I have done nothing wrong, I thought, as dread grabbed me by the throat. Suddenly I felt very young. "Atalanta," he said, "come look at this." It was a gold ring, heavy enough to stun a crow. Carved into it was a double thunderbolt, the weapon of almighty Zeus. The man who wore this had a very high opinion of himself, I thought, rolling it in my palm, and wondering where I had seen such a thing before. "It is the king's," said Castor, and Bias slowly nodded, almost unwillingly. The king's, I thought, for suddenly I could not speak. "Atalanta," Bias said my name with such sadness and finality that I quivered. Wanting suddenly to be rid of the ring, but knowing my impulse came too late, I gave it back to him. Now the children were silent, and I heard broken whispers from the women. A preternatural stillness came over me, and I thought of the fates, patient, inescapable. It was as if, by touching the ring, I had agreed to something that had been decided long, long ago. Aware that the horsemen were watching me, I straightened, standing tall. Then they stepped forward, claiming me for my father. 11. I gathered my few belongings and made my farewells. "Remember us," said Castor, and my mouth trembled. Feeling the press of his warm, sure hand on my head, I whispered that I would see him soon, for to say anything else would have made me cry. Then we set off down the mountain. The men, who had introduced themselves curtly as Mateos and Periphanos, led their horses down the steep rocky trails in silence. From time to time the horses slid, and the men exchanged uneasy glances. They might have done better fetching me on mountain goats, I thought spitefully. Before long, Ora and I forgot ourselves and went too far ahead of them. The first time we were lost to their view, I heard Mateos, the elder, call out, "Princess!" I stopped in my tracks. Princess, I thought, jarred by the sound of it. As we waited there, I wondered if Meleager's uncle Plexippus, who had called me a slut with dirt between her toes, and he was right about the dirt, might have curbed his rage if he had known I was royalty. Perhaps. Most certainly he would still be alive. I scowled, disliking the memory and where it led. My visit to the oracle had eased my mind about the hunt and its terrible consequences, and I could not think of them now with some measure of calm. Still, I did not like to think of them at all. Then, as I stood there, the first of my oracle dreams came back to me. The skeletal man beckoned, and I knew that he was King Iasus, the father who had left me to die when I was born. I knew also that he was weak, nearly moribund, yet possessed of a strong malevolence. My fear of the bloody bulls at his feet gave him great satisfaction. I wondered if the king intended to harm me, and if the entrails were indeed human. Everyone knew that human sacrifice was still practiced in some parts of Arcadia. Was the king inviting me to sacrifice myself? I shivered. And where was the queen? Nowhere in the dream, I thought. Absent, just as she had been absent from my life. With this thought the men reached us. They were panting, and their horses were blowing a little. Dark patches of sweat marked their coats. "The paths up here are difficult," I observed. Mateos caught his breath. "You do not seem to find them so," he said. "I know them well," I replied. "Are we far from the field with the shepherd's hut?" he asked. "No, it is—" I was interrupted by a high-pitched wavering call, like an eerie scream. It was not a call of any bird I knew. The horses' ears shot forward, and a low ruffling sound came from deep within their throats. Periphanos' horse backed a little, tossing his head. Then he too cried out shrilly, and from a distance the call came back. "There they are," said Mateos with evident relief. "More horses?" I asked. "One more," said Periphanos, and now he was smiling. "For you." Her name was Callisto. She was dainty and copper-colored, adorned with tassels, and when she saw us, she whinnied again, swishing her tail. Her eyes and lashes were dark, and her flaring nostrils were pink, like the inside of a shell. She was beautiful. The boy at her side patted her neck soothingly. "Is she named for the nymph?" I asked. Callisto, a lovely wood nymph, was pursued by Lord Zeus and bore him a son. Hoping to protect her from his wife, Hera's jealousy, Zeus changed the nymph into a bear. Hera promptly sent Artemis on a bear hunt, so Zeus vaulted Callisto into the heavens. Now a bear made of stars, she floats in the night sky. Periphanos had jumped off his horse. As it munched the sparse greenery, he nodded. I was pleased. The appearance of a horse with a bear's name seemed like a good omen. Any reminder that Artemis had sent a bear to save my life gladdened me, and now my spirits rose a little. "Callisto," I said, and her ear flicked back, then forward. To my delight, she licked my hand when I held it out to her. Periphanos, who leaned against his horse, smiled. "We should be going," Mateos said. "We have a long ride. Chorus, help the princess up," he added brusquely. As Chorus came around to me, I watched to see how Periphanos mounted. He stood at his horse's side with his hands placed lightly on his back, then jumped, swinging his right leg up and over. Then he was astride, reins in hand, as if the wind god Zephyrus had blown him there on the gentlest of breezes. The feat seemed effortless, but I knew it was not. Every muscle in Periphanos' back had flexed when he rose. Standing next to me at Callisto's side, Chorus pointed to my left foot, then cupped his big rough hands and offered them to me encouragingly. I felt a stab of panic. I could shoot and I could run, but could I mount a horse without immodesty? Conscious that the men were watching, I arranged my chiton so that it would not open when I jumped. Then I stepped into Chorus's hands and hoisted myself up as if I were climbing a tree. I swung my leg as Periphanos had, and lowered myself gently onto Callisto's back. My chiton remained closed through all of this, a small miracle. Callisto's warm sides felt good against my calves. I looked over at Periphanos to see how he was holding his reins, and quickly arranged mine the same way. "The princess is ready," said Matthäus. It was less a question than a gruff acknowledgement. I sat up a little straighter. "I am," I said, wishing it were true. 12. Many hours later, as we came within sight of the palace, the horses tossed their heads and began to jig. Then, as if at a signal, they took the long uphill slope at a breakneck run. Callisto had been lagging behind. Now she bolted ahead as if stung by a gadfly, and I found myself slipping off her back. I grabbed desperately at her mane, but it did no good. Unless she slowed down, which was clearly not her intention, I would fall. The ground was very stony. All afternoon I had marveled at our horses' speed, at the way their long legs devoured the roads and fields almost magically. In my admiration, they had become noble beings, almost worthy of reverence. Now, as they bolted, my infatuation ended. With my legs flopping and my arms flailing, I could only think one bitter thought. Thanks to a horse, I was about to suffer grievous public humiliation. "Lean forward," called Periphanos. He was taking the hill in a kind of half-crouch, and when I somehow managed to imitate him, my balance improved at once. "Thank you," I gasped. Then, to shouted greetings from the walls, we slowed. A pair of massive bronze doors opened, and we trotted into a spacious courtyard. A boy who might have been Chorus's brother helped me off Callisto, for which I was grateful. My legs were as limp as empty sacks, and led her away. After a moment, Ora appeared, wagging her tail, none the worse for wear. An elderly pair of hounds sauntered over to sniff her. Ever mannerly, she bowed in greeting. Matthäus and Periphanos took their leave. For a moment I was alone, standing unsteadily before a large stucco building with handsome wooden doors and many windows. I wondered how it could possibly be my father's home, for it was nothing like the shadowy, gloom-ridden place of my dream, where malice hung in the air like torch smoke. Everything here bespoke of prosperity and order. A woman with pale speckled skin, small and round as a hen, bustled over to me. "Greetings, lady," she said amiably, looking me up and down as if trying to decide which part of me to clean first. "I am Entella. I will show you to your quarters." The room inside, white stone streaked with gray, was wonderfully cool beneath my grimy feet. Ora's nails clacked as she walked sedately at my side. I marveled at her perfect composure until I remembered that she had once belonged to a prince. She had spent far more time in palaces than I ever had. "Where is the king?" I asked. "He is resting," said Entella, indicating a hallway to our left. "He will meet you at dusk." I followed her past a large, high-ceilinged central chamber, where rows of benches squatted before a single throne. Only one throne, I thought, following Entella down another long hallway to the right. Why is that? We came to the end and she opened a door. "Here we are," she said, leading me into a large sunlit room. I looked around warily. Though it was well furnished, the room had an air of neglect about it, as if it had lain empty for years. The skin of a huge striped animal sprawled across the floor, its mouth frozen in a snarl, its glass eyes staring. 2 heavy spears, crossed above the massive bull-hide shield on the wall, looked as if they had not been used since Zeus battled Cronus at the dawn of time. A low table with gold claw legs sat next to the carved bed. On the table were a silver water pitcher and a cup. It was all very princely, and nothing like my deerskin shelter in the forest, which, along with Castor and Bias, I had suddenly missed very much. I set down my bow and quiver, barely suppressing a groan, for now I ached fiercely from ribs to knees. My seat and the backs of my thighs burned as if they had been flayed, and I wondered with alarm if riding a horse always caused such misery. That would be dire. Despite my near calamitous arrival, I very much wanted to ride again. I will, I told myself, if I recover. When I recover. "Will you bathe, my lady?" asked Entella. "Or would you prefer to rest?" "I will bathe," I said, which seemed to please her. On the way to the women's bath, she told me she would be serving me, and laughed when I asked her what that meant. I will try to keep you clean and well fed, she said. Will you feed Aura also? I asked. If you keep her clean. Done. If you let me, I will arrange your hair and help you dress. I will, I said. I liked her forthrightness. She could have been one of my tribe. Then I will come to you later to prepare you for the evening, she said. I expected blisters or worse when I undressed, but found only a few bruises and some chafed skin. Not so bad, I told myself, settling into the bath with a heartfelt groan of relief. Not so bad at all. I sank, then rose to the surface so that only my face was above water. While I floated there, a startling, hopeful thought came to me. What if my dream of the king was not a portent, but a divine joke? What if the gods for sport had tricked me into fearing him? Perhaps he is a good, kind, loving man, I murmured dreamily. Anything is possible. Artemis herself told me so. Apollo and Artemis. Ah, poor thing. Save your pity, she doesn't need it. How do you know? I'm oracular, remember? That doesn't mean you're infallible. I'll wager she can handle him. How much? 2 of my best arrows? 3. The ivory ones that Hephaestus made. Agreed. If I win, I'll take your ivory quiver. That's my favorite. Yep, I know. 13. Entella came at sunset with a finely woven white chiton, which she fastened at my shoulder with a gold pin. Then she sat me down and combed and braided my hair, rolling my head this way and that as if it were a melon. Her plump, dexterous hand smelled of rosemary. When I was groomed to her satisfaction, she escorted me into the courtyard. Wait here, she said. He will be coming soon. I sat on a stone bench and watched the light seep out of the sky. The cicadas began their loud, tuneless song. At length I heard a door open and the murmur of voices. Someone called my name. I rose, my palms so wet they left dark imprints on the stone. Then, taking a deep breath, I crossed the courtyard. He was very tall, handsome, despite his gauntness, with dark, watchful eyes and a black beard streaked with white. Thick black eyebrows crossed his forehead in an emphatic line, giving him the look of someone who was difficult to please. There was no denying the resemblance between us. My eyes and hairs were brown, not black, but our foreheads were the same, high and domed. And then there was my height. I was nearly as tall as he was. He is your father, I told myself, like it or not. He stepped forward with the help of a wooden staff, and the small, plump, fair-haired woman beside him gave me a quick, timorous smile. She could not be my mother, I thought. She was too young, and looked nothing like me at all. Her dress and jewels were of such richness that she could not be a servant either. Welcome, daughter, said my father. His voice was unexpectedly deep and soft, like a caress. Father. I too stepped forward, revealing myself in the torchlight. His mouth twisted in a spasm of pain or strong emotion. Then he scrutinized me so slowly and carefully that I might have been goods for barter. I stood there until he beckoned me closer, the gold rings on his long fingers chiming. There is something strangely familiar about this, I thought, walking into his awkward, one-armed embrace. He was all bones, and then my dream came back to me. I pulled away. He looked startled, but the fair-haired woman smiled again, as if everything about our meeting were just as it should be. She rose on tiptoe, whispering loudly into my father's ear. Iasis, will you introduce me? This is Nephele, he said flatly, without looking at her. My wife. But where is my mother? I longed to ask, knowing I could not. Instead, I bowed my head. Welcome, said Nephele, returning the gesture. We have heard much of you. Taking hold of my father's elbow, she began to lead him into the palace. And many stirring accounts of the hunt in Calydon, added my father. He moved very slowly. It is said that you are more agile than Theseus, more daring than Jason, and so much stronger than Hercules that he fled in shame. I laughed. Hercules did not even attend, I said. Really? He seemed disappointed. And the other great heroes, Theseus and Jason? I pictured Jason, reunited with his kin in distant Thessaly. For all he knew, I was at home also, much recovered after journeying to Gortys. I wondered what he would say if he could see me. No doubt he would be astonished. Then, being Jason, he would recover quickly and make some nimble jest about my sudden elevation to nobility. I wished he were close by. He alone could make me laugh at this. Jason attended, I said. Theseus also. Is it true that you wrestled the boar in a swamp and then strangled it with your bare hands? Asked Nephele. I wish I had, I replied. It would have prevented a great deal of suffering. At this my father looked at me sharply. Had he been anticipating a breathless paean to the glories of the hunt? If so, he was about to be disappointed. We came to a small square chamber, its pale yellow walls painted with leaping bucks and flying arrows. Nephele helped my father to sit. Once in his chair, he called for wine. An old man scuttled in as if he had been poised for the summons, filling my father's silver goblet to the brim. Nephele waved him away, as I did. Where I came from, we drank wine only when sacrificing. Even then I was not overly fond of it. My father drained his goblet hastily, as if taking a potion. Then, seemingly surprised to find the goblet empty, he motioned for more. The old man refilled it, and again my father drank. Food was set before us. Olives, bread, lentils, roast mutton. Nephele began to eat without delay, murmuring appreciatively. The food was rich in oils and spices. It tasted wonderful. My father did not even look at it. We heard that you wrestled the mighty Peleus, and won. This was the most outlandish thing I had ever heard. Wrestlers competed naked. Surely my father knew that. I did not, I said, nor would I. Ever. The dark eyebrows went up. I am chaste and a devotee of Artemis, I informed him. I would never appear unclothed in public. Artemis? He said, raising an eyebrow. The manner in which he said this one word made me feel as if I were an ignorant child. Before I could reply, Nephele said hastily, We have heard so much praise of you, so many glowing reports. It is hard to know what is true and what is not. Be assured that I did not wrestle Peleus, I said. You did attend the hunt, did you not? Inquired my father. Or is that another wild fable? I was there. So, he said, as if the admission were a minor victory for him. Tell us what you did. Please, said Nephele. We are so eager to hear of it, from you. I was the only woman and the only hunter with a bow. At this my father's mouth twitched downward in something like approbation. I drew first blood, I added. Were you rewarded? He asked quickly. Meleager gave me the trophies, I said, but... Oeneus' son gave you head and hide? I nodded. He motioned for more wine, exclaiming, The head and hide of the great Caledonian boar! Well done! I will hang them in the throne room! His voice rang with delight. When I said nothing, but only toyed with my food, he thought to ask, Where are they? The trophies. I do not have them, I said. He frowned. Were they stolen? I left them in Caledon. This drew a look of pure astonishment. Why? I hesitated, knowing my answer would displease him. They came at too great a price. Too great a price, he echoed softly. Too great a price? I know men who would have died for those trophies. I glared at him. I know men who did, I said. Oh, Nephele gasped. How terrible. It was, I said, remembering Meleager's death agony. Terrible or not, said my father, waving his hand dismissively, you achieved no small fame in Caledon. I was not aware, I retorted. Bursts of pink appeared on his face, and his brows came together in a thick, dark line. How could you be aware of anything? He asked, his sonorous voice suddenly tinged with venom. Hiding in the mountains with those miserable bark-eaters. He is drunk, I thought, feeling both dread and anger. He gave me a joyless smile. Things will be different now, he said. You are a princess. You belong here in the palace, not roaming the forests." He drank. "And there is your duty to consider." "My duty? I lack an heir." I did not understand what one had to do with the other, nor did I understand how he and Nephele could be childless. She seemed healthy enough to bear an army of children. I turned to her. Eyes downcast, face expressionless, she shook her head. "One was stillborn," said my father, as if he were talking about livestock. "Then she miscarried. The last one died young." 2 months. It was a whispered lament. My father was unmoved. "You are my only offspring," he said to me, "and my health is failing." He drained his goblet and set it down unsteadily. It wobbled and fell, surrendering a few brown dregs to the table. "So I have decided to marry you off. Word has gone out to other royal houses of the region, those with eligible sons. Many have responded. It appears you will have a choice of consorts," he added, as if delivering good tidings. "You will select one quickly and produce a son without delay. He, my grandson, will inherit the throne." 14. I felt as cold and vaporous as a shade, as if I were hovering outside myself, watching to see what the girl at the table would do. I saw her raising her arms to Artemis in a frenzied plea for help. I saw her loose an arrow that pierced the king's brittle chest, drawing blood and yellow bile. I saw her flee with her hound into the deepest recesses of Arcadia, as if pursued by the Furies. Then the moment passed, and I was sitting there dully stunned into my silence by my father's pronouncement. "Help me up," he ordered Nephele. She gave me a sad, surreptitious smile before leading him away. Eventually I returned to my chamber and sat down heavily on the bed. Aura joined me, and I stroked her mouse-colored coat. When she lay down, making little noises of contentment, I settled beside her and recalled my dreams of the goddess. Once again she told me to avoid marriage. Once again I understood that despite her playful manner, she meant me to obey her, and I resolved to do just that. But my father was commanding me to marry. My eyes flew open, and I felt the raw terror of a rabbit in a snare. I told myself that Artemis would help me, that she would send me a dream, and the terror subsided. As I had done at Gortys, I knelt and prayed for her guidance. Then, becalmed, I slept. The sky was still dark when I woke. I searched my mind for some sign of the goddess, but all I saw was a riderless horse, head bowed, on its way to the palace. It was a melancholy image I did not understand. Castor had once told me to think of disappointment as rain or fog, weather of the mind that I would inevitably pass. I was 10 years old, and not yet allowed to hunt with the men, though I could shoot as well as any of them, and outrun them too. I had cried bitter tears, taking little comfort from his words, yet I had never forgotten them. Now they gave me a kind of bleak solace. "I will run," I decided. Stretching cautiously, I found that I was stiff, but no longer aching. It would be good to leave the palace. My old chiton was on the claw-foot table, folded neatly. It had become very clean, and Tella's work, no doubt. It will not be clean for long, I thought, putting it on. After I persuaded Aura to leave the bed, we crept through the darkness, passing one snoring guard in the throne room and another in the courtyard. Beyond the dining chamber were more hallways and rows of storerooms and kitchens. Then we were outside again, this time at the back of the palace. 2 little kitchen maids, curled up near the hearth, stirred as we walked by, but did not waken. A sliver of moon hung low in the sky, offering the quietest possible greeting. An owl hooted once. A few of the horses, tethered to a line under an open shed, raised their heads and nickered. One of them was the lovely Callisto, whose nose was as soft as moss when I stroked it. "We will ride again soon," I told her, and her ears came forward. By now, Aura and I had drawn the attention of the guards at the wall. The 2 men flanked a pair of tall wooden doors. Straightening as we drew near, they stared at us with undisguised curiosity before mumbling a greeting. "Will you let us out?" I asked. Aura did her part by wagging her tail beseechingly. They exchanged a look. "We cannot, my lady," said one. "Why not?" I had been free to roam at will since the time I could walk. Now I felt a quiver of panic at the threat of confinement. "We have orders," said the other. "You are not to leave the palace without an escort." "Ah," I cocked my head, as if the restriction were entirely reasonable. "I suppose I will have to find one, then." Turning, I headed back to the palace. "I cannot carry you," I hissed from the top of the wall. Years of climbing trees had made it easy to get up here. Less easily was convincing Aura that she must stay behind without barking. After much entreaty, and promises of tasty bones, long runs, and half the bed, she finally dropped to her haunches with a baleful look. I climbed down the outside face and dropped into the tall grass, quickly finding the track I had ridden on horseback yesterday. Then I ran. I went east, feeling a burst of joy to be well outside the walls and in motion. I was glad for the strength in my legs, for the steady beating of my heart, and for the cool embrace of the air as I found my speed and held it. Most welcome of all was the gradual quieting of my mind, the slow fading of inner voices and nagging worries. My awareness became pure sensation, moving from breath to earth and back again. Then, as if the goddess herself were whispering in my ear, the solution to my dilemma came to me. I would tell my father that I would marry only if certain conditions were met. If he agreed to them, and I thought he would, no man would ever claim me for his bride. Even as I appeared to honor my father's demands, I would remain true to the goddess. Then I would return home where I belonged. Much cheered, I raced the dawn back to the palace and was in my room before the sky turned pink. 15. Entella was surprised to find me awake when she came to my room at sunup, and highly displeased to find my chiton, the very one she had washed only hours before, sweat-stained and grimy. "How did you get it so dirty?" she asked. "I visited the horses." "The horses?" She said the words almost mournfully, and her plump mouth turned down at the corners so that she looked like a baby preparing to wail. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have tried to keep it clean." Her eyes filled. Puzzled and alarmed, would she weep every time I dirtied my clothing? I asked. "What troubles you?" She stopped, took a breath, began again. "You are a princess, not a stable girl," she said. "Now please give me that thing." I removed it, and she hurried out of the room. When she returned with another, of much finer weave, I allowed her to put it on me, and then to fuss with my hair. "I suppose I will need another garment or two," I said, thinking to make amends. "You will need many, now that you are here. Jewels also." Jewels? I could not imagine adorning myself with gold trinkets, though I knew many women liked them. The ladies of Oeneus's court, assembling before the hunt, had fairly clanked with the stuff. Medallions and diadems, armlets and rings and earrings, given them when they bore male children. "They would only get in my way," I said. "In your way?" Entella asked. "When I hunted or raced." "But you are a lady of the palace now, surely. Being here will not stop me from hunting. I will never give that up, no matter where I live," I declared. Entella's hands grew still. Then she said, "You are like your mother." "You knew her?" I felt almost dizzy. I had thought of my mother often over the years, with confusion and yearning, and sometimes bitter curiosity. It was easy to hate my father after learning what he had done, and I had. If last night were any indication, I was welcome to continue. He seemed bent on encouraging my loathing. But my mother was different. She had always been a puzzle, remote yet haunting. All I knew of her was her name, Clymene. I wanted more. I turned so that I faced Entella. "Tell me about her," I pleaded. "What was she like?" "Tall, beautiful, restless," Entella said fondly. "She was from Iolcus, in Thessaly, a distant relation of the king." "Which king? Peleus?" Jason, heir to the throne of Thessaly, had been forced into hiding as a boy when his uncle Peleus seized power. After years in the care of Chiron the centaur, he came before Peleus to claim his birthright. Peleus sent him after the Golden Fleece, assuming his nephew would never return alive. It was a serious mistake. Entella nodded. "You said I'm like her. How?" "In appearance, in bearing, she was forthright as you are. and she loved horses." "Ah, so she was like a stable girl too?" I asked. The thought warmed me. Entella nodded. "She told my mother, who served her, that she would rather live with them than in the palace. That shocked my mother so." Entella's plump face worked with emotion. "Why?" The words made sense to me, given my father's temperament. "My mother was terrified of horses," Entella began. "And then when—" She stopped. Her face seemed to crumple. "What?" I asked. "Excuse me, my lady," she said, visibly distressed. "I must go." "Don't leave." Surprised by the hot tears in my eyes, I reached for her hand. "Please," I whispered. "I never knew her. I want to hear more." "When the king exposed you, the queen begged him to change his mind," she said. "But he refused. She fled the palace on her horse. Many hours later, the horse returned alone." "It was a black horse," I said, "with a white mark on its brow." Entella's tear-filled eyes widened. "How do you know?" "I saw it again as I had in waking." "A dream," I said. And then, "Please go on." "She was in the forest. She had hung herself. My mother said that the queen died of despair when she could not find you." 16. "I will marry, but only if two conditions are met," I told my father when we were seated. Once again, he and Nephele and I were dining. Once again, his meal was wine. "What are they?" "First, the man I marry must outrun me." He laughed in surprise. "Ha ha ha! So you favor a contest," he exclaimed. "Well, well, you are my daughter after all." And my mother's also, I thought. "What is your second condition?" he asked. "Anyone who loses against me must die." Nephele drew in her breath so sharply that she squeaked. "You are joking," said my father. "Aren't you?" His smile was less assured now. There was a brief silence while he waited for me to reassure him. Instead, I shook my head with my eyes narrowed. He must believe I meant every word. "Well," he exclaimed, pulling in his chin with a frown, "that is rather harsh. Why should I agree to it? Why should any of your suitors agree to it?" I had thought carefully of how I would answer. "As you say, I am your daughter, and your only child. You would not let me go cheaply, would you?" Unspoken between us was the knowledge that he had once thought me utterly worthless and had thrown me away. If there were the faintest fissure of regret in his rocky heart, I was resolved to hammer at it. When he did not reply, I continued. "Moreover, if I marry a man who is my equal, your kingdom will reap the benefits. The son who comes of two strong parents will be strong also, and perhaps even a good ruler. I presume that is what you want for your people." Or you are a bad king as well as a bad father, I thought. It was not necessary to say this. I knew he understood. "As for the suitors agreeing to it," I went on, "they will." I had rehearsed my next words with care. "The arrogant will leap at the chance to win against me," I said. "They will be thinking only of the fame such a feat will bring, not the consequences of failure. The infatuated," I went on, as if they had often wearied me, "will happily risk their lives for love." He was looking at me differently now, like someone roused from sleep by a deadly assassin. I bade them good night. Apollo and Artemis. "Amazing! Your quiver, please." "Holy Hera! I'll never bet against her again." "Too bad. I've been coveting your obsidian knife." "Enough. I'm going hunting." "Don't shoot too many helpless little animals. You're supposed to protect them, remember?" "Be quiet, won't you? Sore loser."